Hi there again. Thank you so much for making it to this lesson. It just goes on to show how dedicated you are towards learning Photoshop. Well, in this lesson, we're going to learn more about actions. Now, I understand we have already talked on and off about actions in previous videos, but we have not quite really delved into it. This is the lesson for it. And by the way, when it comes to actions, I know I sound like a broken record. There are so many things that you can do that there can be scores and scores of books and courses created on it, just on actions. In this lesson, I'm going to get you up and running with actions and give you a quick preview of how it works so that you can start creating actions and start learning more and start from here. So this is a starting point for you if you have never used actions, and even if you have, this will be a nice refresher. We'll go into some advanced features and we'll cover most of the basics. It'll just get you started. So without any further ado, let's get started. And this is going to be exciting because in the process, we're going to be creating some actions as well. And I'm going to give you one action at the end of this lesson, in addition to many other actions that we have shared in this complete course. So again, let's get started. First of all, let us understand what actions are. So if we go to Window, you would notice there's an option called Actions. And by the way, if you go to Window, things here are arranged in an alphabetical order. I don't know why I was searching here. I was out of my mind. Anyway, so here I have certain actions like Remove Background, Saturation Masks. So if we open that and play this action, see what happens. It should automatically remove the background, and it does that perfectly. Again, this is a very simple process. You can easily do that in Photoshop, but this action turns it into one button or just one action. How does that do it? First of all, what are actions? Let's discuss that. So Photoshop actions record your actions in Photoshop. That's all there is to it. When you create an action in Photoshop, it just means that you are recording a set of actions that you do in Photoshop. How can this be useful? Well, let's say there are certain steps that you apply again and again in a particular set of image. Let's say you apply a particular effect, and to achieve that effect, you first create a curves adjustment layer and create a kind of specific curve. Then you create a hue saturation adjustment layer, you increase the saturation a bit, change the hue a little bit, and you again and again use the same numbers to achieve that effect in different images. So instead of you having to create 5 or 6 adjustment layers again and again, why don't you just simply create an action and record those steps so that Photoshop knows what steps to take to achieve that effect, and all you have to do is to click on that action and Photoshop will create all of those adjustment layers for you. It is again your actions, but Photoshop records it so that you can easily use it later and you don't have to redo everything. That's basically what actions are. Now, there's another way in which actions can be useful. Suppose there's somebody else who really worked hard to create a very complex effect, right? And you want the same effect. That person can create an action of it and share it with you so that you can apply the same effect without having to spend hours and hours and replicating the exact steps that person did to create that effect. And that's when you buy certain actions. It can be an effect, it can be a utilitarian action which can be used, let's say, for retouching. It can be anything. So actions can be used to record your Photoshop actions or take somebody else's actions and apply them to your images. So let's take it to a practical level and create a simple action in Photoshop, and we're going to create an action for branding. Now, before we do that, let me quickly show you the remove background action. It's again very simple. If you open up an action, it will show you what steps are taken inside of the action, which is recorded in Photoshop. So the first step here is select quick selection. So we selected the quick selection tool. The second step here is that simply clicking on select subject, right? And the third step here is make. Now, what is make here? It can be anything. So if you click on that arrow, it'll show you detail, new channel at mask channel. So it's creating a new mask using reveal selection. So whatever selection is there, it's simply saying that with the selection active, we are clicking on the mask button and hence removing the background. So that's all been recorded here, and any action you ever download or create, if you want to look at what steps are taken inside of it, just simply click on this arrow, and even inside of this arrow there can be some steps with more arrows. So if you want more details, you can click on that arrow and it will tell you. For example, in an action you applied a Gaussian blur. Now it will be as a step inside of the action. If you want to look at what the value of Gaussian blur was, click on that arrow inside it. It'll tell you exactly what properties or values were chosen for that filter or effect. All right, so for this image, let's first create a branding action. By the way, actions can be included in sets. So each set can have multiple actions. Think of it like folders. So we have default actions in Photoshop. It is a set. Now inside that set, you have a lot of actions, right? And I created certain actions, for example, frequency separation action, which I had shared with you when we were talking about retouching. If you open that, we have two actions, one for 8-bit, one for 16-bit. So a set can have a lot of actions. A set is a group of actions. I hope that makes sense to you. So before we create an action, you can either place an action inside a set that is already there or create a new set altogether. Think of set as folders. So let's create a new folder. In other words, in Photoshop language, set. So click on this button to create a new set and let's name this branding. Okay. Now let's say I had a store and in that store I had several products, and in all of those product photos, I want my branding in there. So instead of me having to open each and every image, let's say we have 300 products or 300 t-shirts or mugs or something, and with different designs, and we want branding on each and every one of those, and there's always new products coming in. It just doesn't make sense to manually do it one by one. So why not create an action? Here's how we do it. So with the branding set selected, click on plus. This will open up the new action dialog box. Now you're on your way to create a new action. Let's name this action branding horizontal. Why am I naming it horizontal? We'll get to that later. We are learning something advanced here. But for now, let's just keep it simple. Let's name it branding horizontal. And that's because this is a horizontal image, not a vertical one. In other words, this is a landscape image, not a portrait one. Makes sense? All right. Now, which set is it inside of? It's inside of the branding set. All right. If you select that set and click on that plus button, it will automatically by default be in that set. If you want it to be in a different set, you can choose that here. And then you can assign a key to it. Let's say there's an action you applied so much that you don't even want to go to actions and then click on it and then mess around with it. You can just give it a function key like F3, F4, or you can have, let's say, F6 with shift. So if you press shift and F6, then that action will automatically play. But I don't want to assign any function key to it. You can also assign a color to that action, but color will only show up in button mode. So right now, even if I apply orange and hit record, and by the way, let me hit record and let me stop this action right here. We'll do it again, don't worry. So this is orange, but we cannot see orange. Why? Because these are not in button mode, button mode. So if you click on this grid right there and select button mode, all of the actions would turn into a button, but at the cost of the sets going away. You cannot see the folders now. You cannot see that the branding horizontal is inside of the branding folder. So all of the folders go away, only the actions stay. But in return, you see the colors, and also you don't have to select the action and click on the play button. Just click on that action like a button and the action will play. Anyway, let's turn off button mode and let's delete that. Let's do it again. Plus branding horizontal. And we don't want to assign a function key. No colors required at the moment. Click on record. Now, whatever you do in Photoshop will now be recorded. So be very careful. If you do certain unnecessary things, that will be recorded too, right? So your recording is on. If you want to take a break, you can just click on the stop and just select the last step and start recording from there. But Try not to do that. Now, the first thing which we want to do before applying certain things like a branding or a watermark, we need to make sure that we have a uniform image size, image dimension. Because if we don't do that, let's say you have a low resolution image and you adjusted your watermark according to that, and then you apply the action to a high resolution image, the size would go haywire, right? So you need to be very careful about the image size. So we have to uniform. The best way to fix this is to uniform all of the image sizes. So let's say the first step I want is going to image size, make sure that it is clicked on, which means that it maintains the aspect ratio, and resampling is set to automatic. We want the width to, let's say, be 2000. Hit OK. See, it recorded that. Now, if you really want to make sure whether it recorded the right thing, you can click on this arrow and check. We have set the width to 2000 pixels with scale styles, with constrained proportions. We maintain the proportions, and we have set the interpolation to automatic. Remember, we did that. Okay, still the recording is on. The next step we want is to bring in our logo. Now it is important that wherever you have placed your logo, keep it there. Don't change the location later. Right now the actions might be working. It might continue to work with your images, but as soon as you change the location of your logo or branding material, the action might not work. It might show an error because it might not be able to find the assets. So I have kept it here. Let's click on that and click on place. Now let's make it smaller. All right, hit enter or return. Now what we want is we want to align it to the bottom left. So with the move tool selected, at the top you click on the three dots right there and make sure you choose align to canvas. And then first let's align it to the left. Then let's align it to the bottom. Press Ctrl or Command T, okay. And then press the top arrow and the right arrow. Keep pressing them one by one. Top arrow, right arrow, top arrow, right arrow. Or you can move it as well. That's up to you. I want to keep the proportions intact, so I'm moving it with the arrow keys. So this to me looks all right. And I'm going to make it smaller like that. Hit enter or return. There you go. This is our branding. Let's go ahead and stop it. Now we have recorded this action. Now everything we did has been recorded here. We changed the image size, we placed it, we placed the branding material from somewhere, and have a look, it has the location saved here. If you change the location, it won't be able to locate it, and then this action won't play. Then we aligned it to the left, then we aligned it to the bottom, and then lastly, we transformed it. Now, let's play this action on some other image. Let's see if this works. So I'm just going to bring in another image here. And let's go to that action, branding horizontal. Let's play it. And it works perfectly. Just compare the size. The size here looks all right. It's the same as this one. There's no weird, crazy thing happening. If we had not made the image size uniform, the size would go crazy. Let's try with something else. Let's try with this one. Let's drag it and drop it into Photoshop. Now, do you notice anything common with all of these images? Apart from these are all wedding photos, couple photos. But apart from that, what common thing you see image-wise? The common thing here is, I hope you guessed that right, all of these images are horizontal. All of these images are in landscape orientation. They're not vertical. So this action seems to work properly. So let's play it here again. Yeah, it worked pretty nicely. However, there will be a problem if the image is vertical. Let's see what happens. Let's drag and drop in one of the vertical images here. And let's try to play the action. And look, it worked, but have a look. This branding is too small compared with the others. It's just too small. We cannot have it that small. So how do we manage that? Well, to manage that, we have to create a different action for vertical images. So let's go ahead and close all the others. Let's go to File and choose Close Others. Apply to all. No, we don't want to save anything. And let's go to History and click on the top part to get the original image back. Okay, so let's record this action for this image. First of all, we're going to do the same thing here. Click on plus and let's name this branding vertical. All right. And then, by the way, if you're thinking this is so simple, this is so basic, this is not that interesting. Well, interest depends on person to person. But what I'm trying to tell you that after this, we're going to create something more interesting, which will automatically have Photoshop choose particular action according to how the image is. So if the image is vertical, it's going to choose the vertical action. If the image is horizontal, it's going to choose the horizontal action. We're going to do that. Just hold on. First of all, let's create the vertical action, and it's inside of the set branding. We don't want to assign a function key, no color. Let's go ahead and start recording. Now here again, we're going to do the same thing. Let's go to image size. Again, we're going to choose 2000, and all of the other settings look okay. Hit OK. And then we want to place our stuff by going to File, Place Embedded. Let's choose the store logo with text, place it, and then just make it smaller. I made the mistake. What mistake did I do? I didn't want to move it in the very beginning. No problem, that's not a problem at all. We can always align that later. That's going to erase that. Still the recording is on, no problem. All you got to do, just align it to the left, align it to the bottom. That's fine. That's going to cover it. Anywhere we might have placed it, alignment would have brought it there anyway. So it doesn't really matter. Now you can freely move it as well from that area. It's not a big deal. I think now the size looks all right. And I'm going to make it a little smaller. Okay, stop it. Now let's bring in another vertical image to check if it's working nicely. So here's another vertical image. Let's start with this one. Let's just drop it right over there. And here as well, let's play the vertical one. It's working nicely. The branding is looking nice and big. Let's go to history. Let's just get back to the original one. And let's try to play horizontal on this one. This should not work properly. And have a look. This is just too small. So how do we make it absolutely all automatic? Here's how you do that. First of all, let's just go back to how the image already was. You do that by creating another action, and you call this the master action. And this is how it works. So let's go back to action. Now inside of branding, we're going to create one more, and let's name this one branding master. Okay, and set is going to be branding, no function key, no color. Let's click on record. Now in this, we're going to insert a conditional. Now, in simple terms, what does a condition mean? Condition means we'll carry out a particular job in this condition. If not, we'll do something else. That's exactly what's happening here. So if you click on this grid right there and click on insert conditional, you have an if command. So if, you have a lot of options there. Now in this case, we want to say if the document is landscape, which means if the document is horizontal, what do we want to do? We want to play the action branding horizontal. Otherwise, because there's no other options other than it being vertical, right? So if it's horizontal, play the action branding horizontal. If it's not, which means, of course, obviously, it is portrait or vertical, play the action branding vertical. Hit OK. And all you have to worry about is playing branding master. That's it. Any image you open. Let's click on stop. And then any image there is. So this is a horizontal, sorry, this is a vertical image. This is a vertical image as well. So let's go ahead and close that. Let's also open a horizontal image. Let's go for this one. Let's drag it and drop it into Photoshop. All right. Now, if we just play branding master, for this one, it played branding horizontal. The size looks all right. And if we go to this one, If we play branding master, select that and click on play button, it played branding vertical. So that's something a little more advanced when it comes to actions. Remember, we talked about frequency separation in a previous lesson. If you haven't watched it, that's fine. You can follow along. All right, in that lesson, I did give you an action for it. And in the action, we had frequency separation 16-bit and 8-bit. And I did tell you that if your image is 8-bit, which you can see right here at the top, or you can also go to image mode, have a look, 8 bits is checked. So you can say this is 8-bit. If it's 8-bit, I asked you to play FS 8-bit. If it's 16-bit, I asked you to play 16-bit. Now, instead of having to do that, what if we had a master action? Again, we are continuing on the conditional. How can we apply conditional here? It will be a little different. All right. So let's create one more action inside of it, which is going to be frequency separation master. All right. So let's click on plus. Again, we're going to stop the action in between to teach you something more essential. So know that we're not making a mistake here. Anyway, so let's start with frequency separation master. All right, it's going to be inside pix frequency separation set, and no function key, no color. Let's click on record. Now, first, let's insert conditional. In this case, we want to say that if the document depth is 8 bits per channel, then we need to play frequency separation 8-bit. We cannot, there is no other thing like else play something else. We don't want that because it can be 32-bit as well. It can be 16 as well. We just want for now that if it's 8-bit, play the 8-bit. Otherwise, if it's not 8-bit, just don't do anything. None. Okay. Let's insert one more conditional. Insert conditional. If it is 16-bit, document depth is 16 bits per channel, then play 16-bit. Otherwise, don't do anything. If it's 32-bit, well, I don't recommend working with frequency separation on 32-bit. If it's 32-bit, I would rather have the image converted in 16-bit and then apply the 16-bit. So what do we do now? Well, let's stop the action and we will continue this action later. Let's create one more action where we convert a 32-bit image into 16-bit and then apply the 16-bit frequency separation. Here's what we do. First of all, just to create that action, let's convert this into a 32-bit image. Let's go to image, mode, and then choose 32-bit. Just to make things a little clearer to you, we're gonna make some blank layers like blank curves and few empty layers and hue saturation or whatnot, just for the sake of fun, and maybe even change the settings here and there. And I'm doing this on purpose to teach you something. All right, now let's do it. Now we will create another action, and this action is called convert to 16 and apply frequency separation. Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, that looks all right. Click on record. Now in here, we need to go to image, mode, and choose 16-bit. Now you will see a warning here. That's what I was trying to tell you. If you had just one layer, you wouldn't see any warning. It's important that you understand this. So what we want is we don't want to merge all of these adjustments. All right, there's a merge option, but we don't want to do that. If it's 32-bit and there's lots of adjustment there, we don't want to flatten everything. So we have to choose don't merge. We want this recorded inside of this. That's why I created some empty layers just to show you. Otherwise, it would be don't merge, but I just want you to know what options are there. In case you wanted merge, you can click on merge so that can be recorded as well. Anyway, let's choose don't merge. So now it is recorded that we converted the depth to 16-bit without merge, okay? The next step is simply playing frequency separation 16 action. Apply it with the defaults. All right. Now let's stop this. This is the action, convert to 16 and apply FS. So we'll go back to master, go to the last step of it, and then start recording again. and insert another conditional. And this time, if the document is 32, we need to play the action, convert to 16, and apply FS, frequency separation. Otherwise, don't do anything. Hit OK. And those are the only three options you can have: 8 bits, 16 bits, 32 bits. All right, let's go ahead and stop that. And all you have to do, no matter what the kind of image you're dealing with, whether it's 32, 16, or 8, you just have to click on master and play it. So let's say this is image mode 8 bits. And if I play frequency separation master, see, it's playing the 8-bit one. Okay. If this image is 32-bit, let's change it to 32. See, I told you when you have just one layer, the warnings won't show up. So if I play the master, see, it's playing the 16-bit. Why? Because it's converting it to 16-bit and then playing the 16-bit. Okay. So that's a little more on how conditionals can work and how you can use it. Up until now, we have talked about Photoshop actions that record steps with fixed values. What if you have an action where you have a particular effect or any other kind of action, even frequency separation, where one of the steps will have a different value in each and every image? For example, you have a very high resolution image in that the blur would be a little more than a lower resolution image. So you cannot apply the same value of blur in all of your images, right? Because every face is different, resolutions are different, the size of the face is different. It also depends upon how much work you want to put in inside of frequency separation, how accurate or precise you want to go get. The more precise you want to get, the lesser blur you would want to apply. So that is one value that is not fixed. So how do you create an action where you can change the values of a particular step whenever you apply an action? Let's create an action to understand. So in this case, we're going to create an action for a quick skin softening. Let's go ahead and create that. I already have an action for it, but we're going to create it together. So first of all, let's create a new set, and you can have this set for, let's say, portrait retouching. So let's name this portrait retouching. Inside of that, you can have some actions for retouching eyes. You can have some actions for retouching skin. You can have some quick skin softening actions, all of that. So portrait retouching. This is a good way to organize your actions. Mine is not very organized, I understand that, but this is how to do it. All right. So inside of portrait retouching, click on plus, and this is going to be action for quick skin softening. Inside of the set portrait retouching, function key none. You can have a function key if you wish. Color none. Click on record. By the way, let's give it a function key so that you also learn how to work with that. So for this one, we're going to go with, let's say, F4 or F4. What do you think about that? Do you want shift with it? Or let's say, let's apply. Actually, I have media keys assigned to F keys, so this can be a little difficult for me. But let's say we apply F4 with shift and control. Click on record. All right. Now, whenever I press this key, this action will be automatically applied. Now, once it's recording, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a stamp visible layer at the top, because it's not necessary that whenever you're applying quick skin softening that you just have one layer. Maybe you have applied a lot of things, and in the end you want to apply this quick skin softening. We want this action to be as universal as possible. So here's what we would do. We would create a blank layer at the top, then press Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and E. This creates a stamp visible layer. In some cases, if you directly press Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and E, it might do nothing. So you might have to sometimes create a blank layer and then press that button. Now this layer is for softening. So let's name this softening. Okay. And we're going to create a copy of it by pressing Ctrl or Command J. Whenever you're creating an action, try your best not to select a particular layer unless that's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, in the action, it would be recorded as you have selected quote unquote layer 1. And if that layer 1 doesn't exist, then it can be very confusing for the action and the action will stop working. If you're working with layers beneath it or above it, fine, it'll record, select the layer beneath, select the layer above. That's the kind of recording what we want. There can be some cases where you have to just select a layer. Apart from that, try to avoid it. This one is for the texture. So let's name this texture. And we want to desaturate it. Control-Shift-U or Command-Shift-U. All right, this is desaturated. We were to apply high pass with it. Now, let's turn off this texture layer. Now, let's get down to the softening. Now, as I said, don't select that. So simply press Alt and the square bracket, left square bracket. Just press that or the left bracket, not the ones on the 9s and 0, the bracket keys. So Alt, left bracket, and it will select the layer beneath. Alt, right bracket, it'll select the left layer above. Alt or Option on a Mac. So once you have the softening selected, let's first convert this into a smart object by going to Filter and then Convert. For smart filters, hit OK so that you can change the values later. You want your actions to be as customizable as possible. Your action shouldn't be that if you apply the action after that, the action is applied, the image looks good, and later you cannot even make changes to it if you change your mind. So we don't want that. We want it to be as non-destructive, as customizable as possible. And that's why we converted it into a smart object. Now let's go to Filter, Blur, and then Surface Blur. Now surface blur, we have already talked about it. Radius is the amount of blur you want. Threshold is what you want to blur. Okay, so this looks to be about right. If the threshold is too high, let me share this with you. What happens? Now the preview takes time. That's why I'm not showing you all of the values. All right, so it's blurring everything. As you begin to decrease the threshold, less and less edges are going to be blurred. So for this image, I think 20 is good. That way the edges are not blurred and the skin areas or the more equal areas, more even areas are blurred. This looks to be about right, but we want the ability to change these values later, and that's why this is a smart object. Hit OK. Okay. Now what we want to go back to the texture layer, but if we press Alt and the right bracket, it won't select that. It will select the background layer instead because that layer is turned off. And I turned that off for a very specific purpose. And the purpose was, if we didn't turn that off, we wouldn't be able to have a live preview of what we are doing when we were applying the blur, because above that, we would have the texture. Anyway, this didn't work out. So press Alt and the right bracket again. So that softening is selected back again. We can always delete these steps later. Just select the texture layer. Now it's going to record it as select layer texture. It's just unavoidable at this point. This is one of the very few exceptions where it's just more convenient to select that layer, and that's why we named it properly as texture. If this was layer 1 or something, or matched it with some other name, this might create a problem. Anyway, so this is texture. We want to turn this on. The next thing we want to do is change the blend mode to overlay. Go to Filter, Convert for smart filters. Okay, make sure it's still overlay. Then go to Filter, Other, and then High Pass. And this is actually the texture because we softened it, but all of the texture is gone as well. So we want to choose a value that works good and brings back most of the textures. So we're going to go with 6 here and hit OK. All right. The next thing we want to do is we want to group both of these. So you can press Alt, and if you press the left bracket, it's going to select the softening layer. But along with the texture, if you want to select the softening layer, hold the Shift as well and then press left bracket. Then both of these layers are now selected. Press Ctrl or Command G to group them. Now let's name the group Quick Skin Softening. Also, we don't want it in the extreme dark areas and the extreme highlight areas. So double click on the right hand side of the layer, hold the Alt key or the Option key, click on the slider of the underlying layer on the left hand side, break it apart and take it away from the extreme dark areas, and also take it away from similarly from the extreme bright areas. That way it gives you a more natural result. If you want it to be a little more natural, you can take it further, but to me this looks all right. Okay, let's stop right there. Hit OK. The next thing we want to do is we want to create a negative mask by holding the Alt key or the Option key and clicking on the mask button. And we want to select the brush tool. Also make sure that the foreground color is white. So click on in here, make sure it is white. It will not record that because we haven't changed the color. So press D to set the foreground and the background to defaults. So it's gonna tell you reset swatches. If you still want to absolutely record that the foreground color be white, then you can just press X. Now the foreground color is black. Now you can click on the foreground color, select white, so that it's properly recorded that set the foreground color to white. Now you can click on the background color and set it to black. Now it's set in stone that it's black. It's not required, but just for your mental satisfaction sometimes. Now you have the brush selected, you have the foreground color is white, and that's it. The action has done everything for you. You have to just play the action and paint on the areas which you want to soften. So let's delete it. Now let's play the action. Still, there's one more interesting step. Just hold on. So let's click on the action, click on play. Sit back and relax. Automatically the brush will be selected for you. Automatically the foreground color will be white for you. And then once everything is ready, you can just start painting to make things softer. Right now the flow is at 5, so make sure flow and opacity are at 100 and just paint in to soften everything all up. Of course, remove the blemishes first and then work on these, but this is a pretty nifty brush to create a subtle, nice softness. Let's take a look at the before and after. And let's just squish it a little bit to the right. Here's the before, here's the after. See that softness we created? Now, I always recommend removing the blemishes. But the values we have applied are working with this image. What about other images? We might need different values there. Simple. Just open up the action and just find out where would you want to change the values for different images. We would want to change the values of surface blur, where we add the softness. We would want to change the values of high pass, where we add the texture. So now when you apply this same action, see what happens. Those areas are checked, surface blur shows up, the default values are already there. If you want to go with the defaults, hit OK. Otherwise, if you want to change it, you can change these values and hit OK. The high pass also will automatically show up, so you can choose the values accordingly. The default values will be there already and hit OK. And your actions will work in a customizable manner. Pretty cool, isn't it? Now let's talk about how to work with actions which are a little more complicated that you might have purchased online or somebody might have shared it with you. How to work with them. Some actions you might notice might have some messages in between. How do you go along with it? Well, I have an action for this particular example, and by the way, you can have it, you can download it. I created this about 3-4 years ago, I guess, but it still is a pretty good action. This is called Portrait Pop. It really adds a nice pop, bump, whatever you might want to call it, drama to a portrait. Let's click on that action and let's play it. Let's see what it does. First of all, it gives you a message to paint on the face. It automatically selects the brush for you, automatically selects a red color for you. You just have to click stop and paint on the face, roughly. Yes, you can have messages inside of actions. Now continue playing. Now it's asking you to paint the features. Let's stop. Let's paint on the features like the eyes and the nose and the mouth. All right. If you want to erase something, erase it. Play it again. Now it's using those as selections for applying different values to the overall face and different value to the features. Now it also applied a little bit of camera raw. Let's see what we have in store for us next. All right, now Gaussian blur shows up. Now this is actually a different way of applying sharpness. So if you increase it too much, you'll have a little more sharpness. This is for the overall face. So let's go with 1.2. And now another sharpness comes, and this is for the features only. So you would want a little more sharpness here. So 2.5 is fine. You can always change these values. Now it's asking you to dodge. Now there are two buttons here. Do you want to dodge? If you do want to dodge, stop it and keep dodging. If you don't want to dodge, click on continue. So let's first stop it and dodge some of the areas. With the brush selected, let's decrease the flow to about 5%. I definitely want to dodge this area. Now dramas are fine, but we don't want it to add some eye bags to the image. So let's dodge these areas pretty quick. Let's go with about 3 and quickly dodge these areas. No big deal. Now again, you can take your time with the dodging process. Just brightening up these dark areas. Just make sure that things look all right. And if you go a little overboard, that's fine too, because this effect is a little extra and we're going to be decreasing the opacity later anyway. So don't worry too much about it. Okay, once you're ready, click on play. It's going to ask you, do you want to burn? If you do want to burn, click on stop and start burning. If you don't want to burn, just simply click on continue. And it's done. Now definitely this is too much. I'm going to decrease the opacity to about 40%. Let's take a look. Here's the before, here's the after. See that? That punch, the pop added to the face. If you want more of it, you can have a little more, 60%. Have a look, before, after. So a little more sharpness added, even more sharpness added to the features to attract the attention. If you zoom out, you'll be able to look at the difference. Here's the before, here's the after. See? Now, if there are certain wrinkles or eye bags being enhanced, you can always fix that with dodging and burning. But in return, you do get a pretty nice contrasty portrait. Now you might be wondering, Unmesh, how were those stop messages added, or how were those continue messages added? Well, just simply click on the grid and then you can have insert stop for those stop messages. If you insert the stop. Now remember, in the previous messages, we didn't have a continue button. We only had a stop button, because in those steps, it was necessary that we paint out those areas. But for dodging or burning, we also had the option of skipping it by allowing continue. So when you check that, you also have a continue button. So that's why in the first few messages where we had to paint the features on the face, we did not have a continue button, only a stop button, so that we can stop it, paint it, and then start the action back again. For the dodge and burn, we had continue option there. So if you didn't want to dodge, or if you didn't want to burn, you can just click on continue and skip that process. Working with actions in Photoshop in this lesson will definitely get you up and running. I'm excited to see what you create and what kind of actions you come up with after watching this lesson, and I hope that you can create some actions that serves you a purpose. Thank you so much again for watching this lesson. See you again in the next one. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you keep creating.